Alrighty, how we doing here? Hello, we are live on TikTok, live on Instagram, and live on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. So, welcome everyone. I am so happy to see you here. Um, if you're watching this live, let me know where you're coming in from. Hmm, whatever. TikTok is always different. So let's talk about unconditional positive regard and boundaries. So my name is Hadass. I'm a life coach. I'm a wellness advocate. I love to help people with their health and also with their finances, but I am particularly fascinated with the issues of human rights and ableism, stuff like that. That's that's the sort of thing that really gets me going. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. So I made a reel and on Facebook in particular, it's really been getting a lot of traction, which is awesome. And it was about the concept of unconditional positive regard. And I was asking people what they think of that. Now, the thing about reels are by definition short. Like I think this one was like 45 seconds, which doesn't really give a person the opportunity to really expand on their thoughts. So that's why I am doing this live right now. I usually talk, between 15 and 30 minutes, depending on the situation. So if you're coming in live, please tell me where you're coming in from. If you're watching the replay, I would love to know when you're watching it and where you're from. So I would love to see your comments and your hellos. So, what is unconditional positive regard? That's a mouthful. I might be calling it UPR now and then, just because it's a lot of words. But here's the thing about unconditional positive regard. So, it was a concept that was I think it came originally from somebody else whose name escapes me at the moment, but it was really popularized by Dr. Carl Rogers, who was a psychologist in the 1950s, I believe 1957. Um, he published this, and basically he was talking about therapeutic situation. Okay, so not just in everyday life. He's talking specifically about when people are in therapy, and that it was really important for the therapist to have unconditional positive regard for the client, meaning not to bring their own judgments and biases as much as possible. Of course, therapists are also people, and to bring the try and keep their own judgments and biases of what the client was saying um, outside the conversation, what we call holding space. And you might think, well, yeah, of course, but sometimes it can be quite challenging. Like, for example, I was just reading an article where people were talking about what, for example, if the person was working with a sex offender, somebody who has actually hurt people. What do you do about that? And it was a very interesting answer because, and again, we're talking about a therapeutic situation, not every day. I'm going to get to that in a minute because I got some responses, comments on that reel that really uh, suggested I should talk about this to make clear what I mean by it. I mean, obviously, I can't speak for Dr. Rogers, but I've done some research into things that were written by him, by other people, and discussion back and forth. So, in that therapeutic situation, my understanding is that what he was saying is that even if the person has done terrible things, even if you're talking about a murderer or a rapist or somebody else who has done things which are incontrovertibly, is that a word? Uh, that nobody's going to argue that what they did was not a terrible thing. Let me just talk around that for a minute. So if the person has done something like that, the issue is not about condoning what they did. The issue in this particular case, in the therapeutic situation, is the therapist um, still being open to the person's thoughts, ideas, feelings, and so on. Because as somebody pointed out in an article I was reading, that therapist might be that person's very last chance to bring themselves back into the circle of humanity. So when we're talking about unconditional positive regard, we're not talking about accepting people's behavior necessarily. And that's really why I wanted to talk about this, because I had a number of comments on this reel. Because basically, like I said, the reel is very short, it's less than a minute long. And basically, what I said was, what would your life be like if your motto was uh, unconditional, unconditional positive regard? And I had a number of people respond and say that they ended up in abusive relationships because of this, because they felt that that's what they were doing, and they kept forgiving the person and accepting them, and they ended up being hurt. And so that's not what I'm talking about. And that's why I mentioned boundaries in the title as well. Having unconditional positive regard for other people does not mean that you don't set boundaries. You do not need to be a doormat. And it doesn't mean that you just have to accept everything that the person does. Okay? We're not talking here about what the person does, we're talking about what the person is. Okay? This is a really important um, distinction here between what a person does and what a person is. Because the other place, I mean, I actually ran into this whole concept of unconditional positive regard because I've been reading Dr. Gabor Mate. If you follow my stuff, then you know that I've been talking quite a bit about his work, and I'll be doing more reels and things about Dr. Mate's work and things that he's been talking about. But in one of his books, I forget which one, I ran into this concept where he's talking about parenting, and specifically in early childhood. Okay, where the whole idea of unconditional positive regard of a parent is that children, especially young children, as they're developing their self-worth and so on, if they feel that their parents' love is conditional, then they grow up feeling that they're not very lovable. Okay, because if they could do something that would make their parents stop loving them, that means they always have to perform, they always have to be perfect. If you know people who suffer from perfectionism, um, then, oh, thank you. Um, if you know people who suffer from perfectionism, there's a reasonable chance that they felt as children that they always had to live up to their parents' expectations, otherwise, their parents wouldn't love them anymore. So, this kind of conditional parental regard can be really, really a bad thing for children as they're, especially young children as they're growing up. So those are two contexts where specifically this whole concept is really important. So one is like in the therapeutic setting, where a therapist is uh, making themselves open, holding space for a person, even if the person has done terrible things. And then in parenting, when it doesn't matter how bad the child is, how badly the child behaves, the parent still loves them. I remember my mother, um, nobody's perfect, but I do remember one thing that my mother saying, and I specifically heard her saying it to one of my siblings. It was, she said it in Hebrew, is Gam kshekwasim ohavim. Even when we're angry, we still love. And that's basically, my mother was a psychologist, and I'm pretty sure she was a fan of Carl Rogers. And so the whole concept that just because you're mad at someone doesn't mean you don't love them. And you see people who get absolutely freaked out if somebody's mad at them because they think that they're going to lose their love and regard because they're mad. And that is where I'm where I was really going with that reel. And I hope to be able to develop these thoughts a little further, I'm going to be writing something on my blog and my Substack, and then there's these longer videos that I do. So if you're watching it, um, you can pick up my blog or my Substack. You can find that in the link in my bio. If you're watching this on any of my social media, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, if you look in my bio, you'll see a link to my link tree, and that's where you can find all of these things, my Substack, my blog, and my YouTube channel, where this video will be living once we're done with this. So just as an aside, if you're interested in this conversation about unconditional positive regard and boundaries, and then you can follow it on those things. So let me just grab some water. Okay, so as I was saying, in a therapeutic or parenting situation, it's kind of clear what it means to have this unconditional positive regard. And it comes back, I saw this in Brene Brown's work, but it might have been earlier. It might be Carol Dweck may have expressed this as well. I don't remember the details of who said what exactly, but this the whole idea of the difference, especially as Dr. Brene Brown says it is, there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is, I did a bad thing. How can I fix it? Shame is, I am bad and I cannot be fixed. And you can just hear, even just from the way I was saying it, people do bad things. People make mistakes. People get scared. Remember that song in Frozen? People make bad decisions when they're scared, mad, or scared. I don't remember the exact words, which is funny considering how many times we watched Frozen when my kids were little. But anyway, basically the idea is that people make bad decisions. People do bad things. People say things they later regret. People can be, for their own reasons, they can be liars. They can display narcissistic behavior. People do bad things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these people are bad people. And that's where it comes down to, because I believe, and this is how I express this, I am pretty sure that there's lots of different ways of saying this. My belief is that every human is made in the image of the divine, and every human soul is pure. And there is no such thing as an actually bad person. That's what I think. You can argue with me. I would love it if you would argue with me, actually, because it could be a really interesting conversation. But we need to keep it, we're not doing this in bad faith, and we're not calling each other nasty names, because that would kind of defeat the purpose, right? And that's kind of the whole point of this unconditional positive regard with boundaries. You can think that something that somebody has done is absolutely awful. You can think that their behavior is inexcusable, and you can feel that consequences are called for. And in the case of these people who, for example, were in a relationship with Papa, and they were in a TikTok never ceases to amaze me. But for people who were in this relationship where they felt that they were doormats and basically accepted anything that these people did, the issue here is setting boundaries and saying, this behavior is bad for me. This behavior hurts me. You said A, B, C, and D, and you have not kept your word on this. This is not behavior that I can tolerate. And, it takes a lot of gumption to actually say such things. It's easy for me sitting here for my pedestal of almost 61 years on this earth, and, stable relationship for more than 30 years, wholly, to be able to say, you have to be able to stand up for yourself. You have to be able to say, this behavior is not acceptable. I will not live with this behavior. it can be really hard. And women in particular, but men too, or people of any gender, can find themselves in situations where the logistics of getting away from a bad situation can be very hard, especially if there's children and so on. The fact remains that the behavior should absolutely not be accepted. Where do you draw the line on forcing other people to believe in the pronoun fantasy? Well, you know what, buddy? I think the English language has pronouns, and they really are. And so, if you don't believe in pronouns, you're going to have a really hard time with the English language. So, back to behavior. If people's behavior is not acceptable to you, for example, if you don't feel that you should give other people the respect of using their preferred pronouns, just to give an example, this just came up on TikTok, then if you feel that your life is just going to be unbearable if you have to call people by their preferred pronouns, then you will probably need to take action and not interact with people who care about pronouns. The fact remains is that people who care about pronouns are not bad people, and people who don't care about pronouns are not bad people. And that is something that can be really hard for a lot of people to accept, because we live in a highly polarized society where people have a lot invested in believing that the people who believe other things are actually bad people. And just to remind you of the difference between guilt and shame here, guilt is I did something bad. I really need to turn off the invites beforehand. I don't know why this keeps happening. But anyway, so guilt, I did something bad. What can I do to fix it? Whereas shame is, I am bad. I am not worthy. Nobody's going to love me. And when people are in that situation of shame, which again, Dr. Brene Brown has described so beautifully, and I strongly recommend her books to anyone who is interested in these things, especially if you want to understand about guilt and shame, then you need to, if you can understand the difference between these two things, TikTok always distracts me. I don't know why I even go live on TikTok, except, there's a lot of interesting people on TikTok too, but there's always distractions. It's amazing. So it is absolutely okay to set boundaries and to say, this is not behavior that I want to deal with. So just to come back to the example of the pronouns, I am someone who believes quite strongly that people's pronouns should be respected. It's nobody's business why other people want to be called a certain pronoun. And if you don't know, that's fine. But if somebody has told you that they want to be called they, them, or he, she, he, him, or she, they, and that is not what you think they should be called, then, mind your own freaking business and show them the basic respect to call them whatever they want to be called and by any name they want to be called. And so that's my belief about this. Now, there's a lot of people who disagree with that, and that's fine. I don't necessarily want to have a close friendship with a person like that because we're going to disagree on a lot of things. What I'm not going to say is that this person is not a good person. I believe that each of us is created in the image of God, and I believe that each of us is worthy of love and all the good things in life. Each of us. Doesn't matter how bad a person's behavior is. Behavior should have consequences. If somebody is treating people disrespectfully or badly, or trying to going around shooting people, there should definitely need to be consequences. But we are all humans. We are all humans. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand, because if we could actually, I mean, in the US, it's going to be Martin Luther King Day tomorrow, I think. I'm in Canada, so that's not something that we do. But I've been seeing a lot of stuff, people, people quoting him and do, 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 do. But the, the thing is that it's really important, in my opinion, to distinguish, and I'm repeating myself here, but it's really, really important, in my opinion, to distinguish between behaviors which should have consequences. If somebody is behaving towards somebody else in a hurtful manner, then there need to be consequences for that. And then there's a question about the actual person, and that's where the unconditional positive regard comes in. I can think that somebody's behavior is absolutely despicable. And believe me, there's plenty of people, especially on Twitter, that I think that their behavior is absolutely despicable. But I don't think that they, as people, do not deserve the same um, respect and dignity and health and good life as anyone else. They probably need to get help because it's my experience that when people behave badly towards other people, it's usually uh, goes back to trauma, either in their lives or somebody else, either in their own lives. Sometimes it's intergenerational. We certainly see in our community here, we see people who are suffering the intergenerational effects of residential schools here in Canada, where people who were abused in residential schools then did not know how to parent. They were uh, torn away from their culture, and they were often had all sorts of issues that were not being dealt with, and so they numbed them in the best way they could. And the intergenerational trauma just goes on and on unless somebody breaks it. And I don't doubt that in every country that has had to deal with colonialism, there are the same stories about intergenerational trauma. And so, yes, I'm reading the chat. I'm just not answering it. So, to conclude, I wanted to explain myself here in terms and to continue to explore this concept of differentiating between the behavior and the actual person, because people who grow up believing that people's love for them is contingent on their behavior, you know, people who always need to be a good girl or a good boy, and if you're not, you know, the boogeyman's going to get you. You know, Santa Claus will bring you coal in your stocking, because you're bad. Okay, these things go back generations. This trauma, this idea that, if I don't do what they expect of me, then I will not be loved. And as a young child, if you're not loved, you're going to die, because young children are absolutely dependent on adults for everything, for survival. And a lot of people take this attitude into adulthood with them. The idea that, like Brene Brown calls it, what she call it, perform, perfect. You have to perform, you have to be the best, you have to be an athlete, you have to be a musician, you have to be the absolute best, you have to fulfill all of your parents' dreams and expectations. And if not, excuse me, if you don't do that, you're bad. And this is trauma that a lot of people live with, and it's not always necessarily so so clear cut. And yes, there's a lot of people who are growing up in systemic racism, ableism, all the other things that also affect how they live, because they just grow up in a framework that tells them that they're not worthy. I mean, quite aside from the question of how their parents treated them, people will just grow up with the idea that there's something wrong with them just because of who they are, whether it's the color of their skin or whom they love or the pronouns that they prefer. Some people will be raised with the idea that they are actually fundamentally broken because they are not worthy of love and respect and dignity and all the things that make a person's life worth living. So I'm here to tell you that that is not true. In my opinion, you can disagree with me and feel free to drop me a message and tell me if you disagree with me, if you don't think that we can keep unconditional positive regard even for people whose behavior we don't agree with. Because if people were actually able to do that on a large scale, just imagine what what an effect that would have on our politics, you know? Because I mean, I am an anti-fascist, but it doesn't mean that I think that people who support that kind of behavior are bad people. I think their behavior is really bad, and I think it should have consequences. But I don't necessarily believe they're actually bad people. So anyway, I've been going for 25 minutes. This is longer than I normally do, but this is a big deal to me. So I am grateful to everyone who has joined me, whether live or on the replay. Feel free to drop me a message or drop me a comment or send me a message, and I will absolutely answer that if I have the opportunity. So have a great evening. Remember, I love you because you are all good people. Even if I completely disagree with your politics, I still think you're good people. So remember, I love you. And this next long video will be next Sunday, but you'll probably see the odd reel from me going on in the coming week. And as I said, if you look in my bio, if you are on any of my social media, whether you're on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or Instagram, look in my bio. You're going to see a link there for my link tree where you can find all my other socials and also my Substack and my blog where I will be putting written stuff about this because I think it's important. So have a great evening. Remember, I love you. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye. Let's see, this is the fun part. And broadcast.